And we are really fortunate to have Simon Rockman here to talk about us. I won't say much more about what it is. Simon I've known for many years. I think I can actually say many decades. He founded Watt Mobile magazine and has also been working in the industry to help develop phones, develop user experiences. Probably knows more about how people actually use phones than most other people in the world. So without anything else, let me welcome Simon. Please tell us about how Apple killed innovation and where smartphones are going to go.
So as Nick said, I founded Watt Mobile in '92. I've spent time since either doing stuff in the phone industry or writing about it. And I was at both Motorola and Sony Ericsson, understanding people, understanding technology, and understanding what went into making a phone. And the big inflection point in the industry is, of course, the launch of the iPhone in January 2007, when Steve Jobs said, we're going to build this revolutionary product. It's going to be a telephone and a computer and an iPod, and it's all one product. And we can see the effect it's had on the market. So if you look at these are top-selling smartphones in 2023. The top 7 are iPhones, and the remaining 3 are Samsungs. But the important thing is the remaining 3 are cheap Samsungs. They're £300-400 Samsungs, and the iPhone's £1,000. So money-wise, Apple is completely dominant. And then if you look at margin, Samsung's probably making 18-20% margin on a device. Apple doesn't give figures for its margin on iPhones. It gives its figure across the whole of its business of 46%. And I was talking to Sean Collins from CCS Insight, and his belief is that the iPhone has a higher margin than most of Apple's business. So in terms of sucking money out of the industry, Apple they're actually the reason most operators are poor. But Apple didn't invent the smartphone. I was in a Vodafone shop on Sunday, and I was talking to the sales guy, and I said, so who invented the smartphone? And he said, oh, it was the iPhone. But no, these are smartphones that were on sale when the iPhone came out. So these are all 2007 smartphones. So one of the top left is the Nokia E9 communicator. So that's not the first communicator. The first communicator was 1996. Then we've got the Sony Ericsson P1. That had a lovely feature, a feature I'd love to see on phones again, which was a jog dial. It just mechanically, it's really nice. The Motorola Z8, known as the Kicker. That was nice because when you slid it open, it bent because it was in the days when people made phone calls and it went around the shape of your face. Then we've got the Samsung Blackjack that was an American market phone running Windows Mobile. The Danger Sidekick, running Danger OS. Hugely successful, very popular phone, quite a California phone. Then another Samsung, I can't remember its model number, but again, a Windows Mobile phone. A Nokia N93. This is a time when products were optimized for what people wanted to do, and that was a camcorder phone, and it had a little joystick that made it really good at being a camcorder. We've got the Palm Treo, again, really nice user interface, handwriting recognition, a lovely little phone. Some experimentation, so Nokia did a Linux phone. The LG Prado was the first handset with a capacitive screen. And that's important, we'll come back to it. A Samsung phone, again, can't remember what its model number is, with a two-way hinge, and the Nokia N-Gage, because not everything's great. That's what you see if you go into a phone shop today. Which one is which? One of those is an iPhone 16. But how do you tell what's the differences between any phones? Okay, some of them have got them written on. And you look at the year-on-year improvements between, well, let's take the iPhone. The big improvement between an iPhone 15 and an iPhone 16 is it's gone from having 6 megabytes of user memory to 8 megabytes of user memory. It's, the camera hasn't even got better. The screen hasn't got any better. The differences are really, really tiny. It might have 200 milliamps more battery. The Samsung announced this week, it's got a 15% smaller bezel. It's got a bigger vapor chamber to improve cooling. And one of the cameras has gone from 12 megapixels to 50 megapixels. There are lots of software improvements, but the software isn't special to the new Samsung phone. Lots of the things are Google features that we'll see on all Android phones, and the things that are Samsung specific we'll see on lots of other Samsung products. So when you listen to the reviews, the usual thing you get with every review, and you have done for years, is if you've got the previous model, it's not worth upgrading. If you've got a model that's 2 or 3 years old, then it might be worth upgrading. And you probably want to upgrade because after about 1,500 charges, your battery is starting to die. So you want a new phone. Battery life is really important. Look at how it improved in the first 20-something years. So that's the first hand portable developed by Marty Cooper at Motorola. It had half an hour of talk time, and Marty loved saying, well, it was too heavy to hold for any longer than half an hour, so that's probably as much as one. So it went from nearly 800 grams to functionally very, very similar, the F3, 70 grams. It went from $4,000 to $25, and this was sold in India, and you got 150 rupees of airtime every month for 3 years in with your $25. Standby went from 10 hours to 10 days. And in the early days of phones, people would say, see how mobile phones have got so good, how they've improved, look what battery life has done. You used to have to charge your phone every day. And we're now back in a situation where you charge your phone every day. You look at the original iPhone and the iPhone 16. It's got a little bit heavier, quite a bit more expensive, and battery life hasn't changed. Not entirely a fair comparison, because while the two Motorola's were like for like in abilities, the two iPhones, obviously the iPhone 16 does an awful lot more than the original iPhone. And that's because the original iPhone wasn't a particularly good phone. Again, looking at the history of innovation. So if we go from 92 to 2007, we went from a 2-line display on a Nokia 101 to the first colour phone, which was the Siemens S10, and then it was like CGA colour, it wasn't very good colour. And then we got the Ericsson T68 and the Trim Eclipse that had really good colour. We saw a nice keyboard on the Nokia 6800 that folded open. And innovations like GPS, that was the first widely available phone with GPS. We saw Bluetooth come in, we saw MMS come in, the Ericsson had a clip-on camera. We saw loads and loads of new innovations. Some of the innovations weren't so good. So the phone at the end is the Lobster phone from Virgin. That was one of many attempts at doing a television in your pocket. They were all a bad idea. Virgin did a really good job of the rights managements and negotiations with Sky and put together an ecosystem, and still nobody bought it. The Nokia 7110 was the first WAP phone, and nobody liked WAP. Well, it's not quite the first WAP phone. There was a Siemens that did WAP over SMS, but the first WAP phone with a decent connection, and still WAP wasn't great. One of several Nokia lipstick phones, Nokia playing with keyboards, and the whole Zilibri thing where they just did weird phones. But at least it was interesting and different. And there are future opportunities. There have been ideas that have been floating around forever. So I went to see Philips in Eindhoven before mobile phones were a thing. I was working on Personal Computer World magazine, and they showed me a concept for a bracelet phone for cordless phones in the house. So the top left one is a Motorola concept from World Congress year before last. There's a Nokia concept from 2008. We've got LG concepts and Philips concepts. So there is scope for innovation, but it's not happening. And it's not like Apple can't do it. Apple's done amazing things with the Vision Pro. I remember watching the Vision Pro YouTube videos of reviewers, and they went through feature after feature after feature where it was really clever and properly thought out. The way a virtual window casts a shadow on a physical object and it bends for the physical object. The way you can have a virtual window and you can stick your head through it and see into another world. There's a great video a friend sent me of his daughter wearing one, and a dinosaur leaps out of the screen, a virtual screen, and she is so frightened. It reminded me of the original days of cinema where there was an incident with a steam train that ran towards the audience and the audience fled. She was properly viscerally frightened of the dinosaur wearing a Vision Pro. So Apple can do it, they just don't. And it's not just me saying it. If you look at the reviews, so these are a whole bunch of YouTube reviews, it's just phones have got disappointing. And to understand how we got here, I'll explain a little about when I was developing phones at both Motorola and Sony Ericsson, how we went through our development priorities. So there were 3 sets of things that you looked after when you were managing your development resource on a new phone project. And a new phone would go from idea to shipping in about 18 months with some history and some existing platform. We were really worried at Motorola that Samsung was doing it in 9 months. We brought in McKinsey to help us get that time down, and it went from 18 months to 36 months. But the priorities were things like network-specific features. So there was a time when all the operators had an idea of how it wanted to address its own audience. And one of the things that's changed massively with phones was phones used to be user segmented. The operators would have an idea of different classes of users. A friend, my boss at Motorola, became the world expert on consumer segmentation, and she laughs at when she was doing it way back when. We always thought there'd be different numbers of segments, but whenever she does it now, there's always 6. But it'd be things like the soccer mom, the aspiring professional, the successful businessman, and they'd all have trendy names. And phones were developed for people. Now, phones are developed and everyone squeezes into whatever you get. But networks would have a way of differentiating themselves, and they would offer custom services and custom user interfaces and ways of driving operator revenue, whether you could do all sorts of interesting things with security features if you thought about it properly. And one of the features that One-to-One had in their really early days was that it had a custom hardware button to get to the services. I should have dug out a picture of a Motorola M301 phone I had when I used a One-to-One phone. And I used to order some flowers for a girl. We'd been on a date. Driving home from the date, I pressed the button, went through the menus, ordered her some flowers. It wasn't a very successful service. It failed. They didn't sell very many flowers. But she married me, so so we'd, as a handset manufacturer, we'd kowtow to the operators. Then the second thing was things that other manufacturers had that we didn't. So putting a torch in a phone to a Western market doesn't seem to be that big a deal. But understanding particularly the Indian market, where power is unreliable, a phone is a major purchase. So having a value add for a phone became really important. and lots of farmers have to go out at night and turn on the irrigation systems. The fact that the phone was also a torch that didn't take batteries and was rechargeable was a huge game changer. So when Nokia put a torch in, everybody else had to follow. When Samsung took the antenna out of their phone and didn't have a physical antenna, we had crisis meetings at Motorola on how we're going to achieve this, because the operators had such stringent rules on what went into a phone and how a phone's performance worked that we couldn't see how we could take out an antenna and still meet conformance rules. But that's one of the major things that's changed with Apple. It used to be that engineers decided what phones a operator took. Now marketing departments decide. So the quality of the radio engineering in phones is nowhere like as good as it used to be, and the networks get blamed. And the operators no longer have pushback against the handset manufacturers, because if a handset manufacturer said to Apple, well, you've got to fix the radio, Apple would say, okay, we won't sell them to you. And the operator would lose half their customers. Building phones that do what the operator wants has pretty much stopped. And the third priority, well, it wasn't a priority, it was the stuff that was left over if you had some development resource, was doing something new in a phone that nobody else had done. And I've picked AM radio because it was something I did at Sony Ericsson I was very proud of. In India, we did field research, and I came back from India and I said, India has 4 religions: Hindu, Muslim, Bollywood, and cricket. And cricket is just on AM radio. So just back to the torch, the phone had to represent more value to the customer. If you could listen to cricket on it, it became a better proposition. One of the other things we learned actually in both India and Brazil was the second-hand value of a phone was so important that better packaging mattered, because somebody wanted to sell the phone on, and having a good box meant that it was easier to sell the phone on. So it's very clear that we've lost lots of this innovation. Now, you might say it's because the market's mature. Maybe it's like the PC market. The phones, there's nothing new to invent. So there was I was amused, the marketing director of Samsung posted a video on LinkedIn this week where he talked about all the Samsung innovation, and he went through lots of their flexible displays and smart tables and smart fridges and a cupboard that dries your clothes. And he references back the story of the Victorian patent officer who said everything that can be invented has been invented. And I thought it was very interesting that he talked about all the Samsung products and didn't mention phones. So I don't believe that everything that can be invented has been invented. I get into some quite nasty spats about this kind of thing on LinkedIn. And one of the responses I often get from Apple fans is, but Apple's just giving customers what they want. So maybe we can listen to a couple of experts. So there's this chap called Steve Jobs, and he said, a lot of time people don't know what they want until you show it to them. And then there's a Henry Ford quote that actually when you research it, he probably didn't say, which is, if I'd asked people what they wanted, they would have wanted a faster horse. So we need to get back to a time when there was both operator-led and manufacturer-led innovation, and phones didn't just get incrementally better, where people take risks, they do different things and interesting things. And at the moment, it feels as though this is really hard. It feels as though, remember the first slide, where Apple is so dominant that it's impossible to take on, and that governments around the world worry about the fact that infrastructure is only available from Nokia and Ericsson and Huawei, that having 2 vendors is bad. And it feels like we're rapidly getting towards one handset vendor. 80% of American teens have an iPhone. Actually, when I was in the Vodafone shop on Sunday, I said to a couple of the sales staff, when was the last time you sold something that wasn't an Apple or Samsung product? And they couldn't remember. And then I said to them, when was the last time you sold something that wasn't an Apple phone? And one of them said, oh, I sold a Samsung today. So we are facing a situation where Apple is completely dominant. But I think this will change. I think, particularly thinking back to a time when Motorola had complete dominance of the market, Motorola owned all the IP, it felt unassailable. So that was, I guess, early 80s. Late 80s. And then we moved to Nokia dominance. And one of the things about Nokia was they got platforming right. I remember doing a presentation for Motorola explaining how, comparing Volkswagen's platforming, how you could go from a Skoda to a Bugatti and you could spot all the steps of where they were putting common components all the way through, to Nokia's platforming. And I was quite amused when later on I saw a Nokia financial markets presentation where they compared themselves to Volkswagen. So Nokia had got the supply chain, the inward supply chain, getting components in, really down pat. So much so that when they had a screen problem, it was Epson that took the hit, not Nokia. And they've got the outward supply chain, the route to market. Again, the India experience was a little phone shop in a village in India had to pay for its phone in a week. So get new stock in, have to pay within a week. They could get a phone on order in 3 days in India, and it was taking over a week for a Sony Ericsson phone. I came back from India thinking, how can we possibly compete? Nokia was completely dominant. So dominant that the word Nokia means mobile phone in India, the way you'd use the word Hoover or Kleenex. And it's interesting how that word that used to mean technological product now means brick. People will talk about a Nokia brick and an old dead phone. So the company has gone from unassailable dominance to, well, Nokia doesn't make handsets anymore. HMD used to make Nokia smartphones, has stopped doing smartphones in Nokia, and now the Nokia phones that are in the market are all feature phones. So time will come when I think naturally the market, I don't think we need to do anything about it. Naturally the market will change and Apple will no longer be dominant. We did see a time when BlackBerry was thought that they were completely unassailable because of BlackBerry Messenger, and who would ever want to give up BBM? So I'm not as gloomy as I might sound, but we do need to get the story out there that Apple didn't invent the smartphone, but that begs the question of who did. And the answer is IBM. The IBM Simon from 1994 was an analog phone. It had some interesting, importantly, it had fax, and it had a phone socket so that when coverage wasn't good, you could plug it into the phone network and still use it. It had predictive text. It was a smartphone. And this was, 94 to 2007? 13, I can't do that, but I should have worked this out ahead. But we've seen loads of phones before the iPhone. So the takeaway from today is Apple didn't invent the smartphone. So I'm now ready to take questions. So that's me. I collect typewriters. And I also want to give a shout out to the Mobile Phone Museum. I took most of the pictures in this presentation from the Mobile Phone Museum, which is run by Ben Wood from CCS Insight and Matt Chatterley from EE, who would hate every word I've said. Matt's a huge iPhone fan and thinks that the whole future lies with Apple, and we have some testy conversations. So I want to know how much trouble I'm in. So I want to vote. So I want to know which people here prefer Android phones and which people prefer iPhones. So if your preference is Android, can you put your hand up? And your preference is Apple? I think that's probably about 50-50. Yeah. So, anyway, thank you.
There, we should have taken that survey at the beginning as well to see whether Simon has changed your mind on any of it. So, thank you for that. What I'd really like to do is open this up to the audience. It's fascinating how we've forgotten how things can change. And I think, as we said in the introduction, it's not the first time in history this has happened. It happened with steam engines. It happened with sort of penicillin and phages. Things happen in industry. Everybody says, well, that's so good, we'll just stop doing any work on anything else.
Well, actually, I think a good example is search engines, where Google was dominant, and now AI is really going to undermine Google's dominance there.
Yeah. So, please, questions? Start with over there.
In 1994, when the first phone came out, what was the state of GSM?
Well, actually, that's an AMPS phone, so it was American market, so analog. So no, it was quite a long time before GSM.
Only 2 years.
When did
94?
when did America get digital?
Oh, in America, but over here we had GSM in 92.
Yes.
And it's interesting, in those first 10 years, in the 1990s, there was such a difference between what was happening in Europe and what was happening in the States in terms of mobile telephony. The other interesting one, which we haven't talked about in here at all, is what was happening in Japan, because they arguably had the first popular smartphone service in iMode with Docomo.
And App Store with iApply. So we all think of apps as being, there's an app for it, an Apple thing. But Europe, we had Java that wasn't done very well, but Japan had iApply that was done well. And there were magazines in shops talking about Apply.
Thank you. Simon, who do you think is going to succeed Apple when they finally crash and burn?
I think it will be a non-phone product. I think smart glasses are probably the interesting space. If you think about how big and bulky an original Bluetooth headset was, the original Ericsson thing that was big and uncomfortable to wear with a long boom mic, and now you think you can get high quality Bluetooth earbuds that you can put inside your ear with a long battery life. The possibility that smart glasses will just look like real glasses is very real, and I think that will give us head-ups displays and communications, and we'll start seeing glasses replace the black mirror.
So while we're walking down, I mean, the other thing we've seen this year is the sort of little cellular AI assistants, the human AI, which I think have been underwhelming. But it goes back to an idea which, again, is a repeat of something that happened around 2000, where people said, all you need to do is actually put the connectivity part of a mobile phone in something that you stick on your belt, and then it will just talk to your glasses or to your wristwatch or anything else you're wearing. And we may see it break down again. And it's almost, I think, a question of not when will Apple go, but when will we decide we don't want to carry around a slab of glass?
That was pretty much my question. Why do
Sorry.
we need? No, but it's brilliant. Why do we need better phones? Is it something else that will take over, like a wrist thing or connectivity? So yeah, really great angle to look at. Thank you.
So perhaps the question is why should we think that we've got to the peak of development? I mean, almost everything else, things keep on changing, and we're stuck in this little black glass slab. I think it's a Star Trek influence that's...
And actually, I don't necessarily want better phones. I want more variety in phones. If you look at most markets, there's consumer segmentation. I bet if you went and looked at the car company Stellantis, they'd say, that's a girl's car, that's a man's car, that's a woman's car, that's a boy's car. And they've developed cars with a target customer in mind. And we used to do that with phones. So Sony Ericsson had CyberShot as its photography phone and Walkman as its music phone. And we've lost that. And people aren't all the same, so phones shouldn't all be the same.
But do you think the industry's become scared of segmentation?
So I think the whole problem is everyone just follows Apple. And if Apple isn't trying, the industry isn't trying.
We got one over there. John, up the back. I thought I was going to have to do the pantomime of dividing the audience into half here.
Thank you. You talked about Apple not trying. Do you think that's lethargy, complacency, or actually a deliberate act? What they're very good at is buying up any new niche little company that might have something interesting and just making sure it doesn't appear.
I think it's just the iPhone's just become the cash cow. There's no one to run ahead of. And it's like the story of the two men in the jungle, and one starts tying up his shoelaces and the other says, what's going on? He said, well, there's a leopard. And the man says, well, you can't outrun a leopard. He said, no, but I can outrun you. So Apple is only trying to outrun the other handset manufacturers and isn't trying very hard. In engineering within an iPhone is beautiful. You look at the teardowns, you look at what they've done with titanium, you've looked at their use of materials and glue, and the raw engineering in an iPhone is lovely. I'm not disparaging Apple at all for that. I'm disparaging them for the lack of trying anything different and exciting.
Yep, down middle of the front.
Yes, there's... Wait for the mic. Thank you.
I was remember back in the 2000s, we had the great telecoms boom and bust, and a lot of that was directed at the mobile phone business. They looked at Japan and saw NTT.Docomo, saw that they had a transaction system there, and suddenly the mobile phone became the way in which you could actually buy stuff. And huge amounts of money were put in by the telecoms companies to grow their own version. I had a small part in that, having to build a big portal in Hong Kong to service 7 million users. By 2001, we realised that the market wasn't really there. They'd invested and bet on the wrong thing. It was 2001, when did the iPhone come out? About once
2007.
Yes, quite. So the technology was 7 years too early. But also the discussions that I had at the time as well was, I was talking about SMS. SMS was, I think it was an engineer's test facility. And I met somebody who was complaining about the excess traffic on this kind of management channel. And until they actually worked out, what it was the mobile phone contracts were very expensive. Kids could get hold of them, but they couldn't afford the contracts. But when they discovered this, they started using them under their desks. Mm-hmm. And I tried to explain to somebody that the next iteration was not going to be for you, ordering your takeaway in your car before you go home. It's going to be for kids.
Okay.
And then...
Okay, there's no way I'm going to answer a question on SMS when one of the 4 people who invented it sitting 3 rows behind you. So Kevin, could you explain the history of SMS? Could Kevin... it was an engineer's test.
It was never designed for the mass market.
Okay, so can Kevin have the microphone?
I think if you look at the whole history of cellular telephony, 1G wasn't designed for the mass market. I mean, it was designed for a lot of people, but, tens of millions. I think SMS, and I was involved in SMS since the mid-'80s. I don't think there was any problem with capacity. I think the biggest problem with SMS was that the networks didn't connect to each other. So I was personally involved in a discussion on the internet at the time to see how people could talk to each other when their own operator wouldn't connect to a different operator unless it was in another country. So we did overload an SMS center in Estonia because everybody was using the SMS center in Estonia to send messages from Cellnet to Vodafone or Orange to one-to-one. But eventually the operators realized they needed to interconnect, and that's when it took off.
This is not invented by a marketing department.
No, it was invented by engineers who were working on 2G in the mid-1980s.
People get taken completely by surprise by how people actually use the phones. When I first saw a lady navigating by ringing up a friend and asking the directions, I would never do that. But it's the next iteration is going to be. You're probably going to have. We've got another 2 billion people who are not connected to the internet, and there's a possibility of that happening with satellites, low Earth orbit satellites, and satellite to cell phone. Now that is a nascent market; it's just beginning. But that type of functionality will lead to all kinds of different things which are not anticipated by marketing departments. The phone then becomes, like it is today, a Swiss Army knife, and you bolt on an extra function, and it may make some relevance to a particular market.
There's a way in between, which is you do ethnographic research, like Jan Chipchase at Nokia coming up with a torch for a phone, and you understand people. So I completely agree that people do unexpected things. And actually, we've been really bad at guessing what people are going to use phones for. So I remember talking to somebody at 3, and they thought what people were going to use 3G for was watching football clips. So they bought rights to show football clips on phones. The subscription rate was so low, he told me, for everyone who took out a subscription and what we paid for the rights, we could have bought each one of those people a house. We have been very bad at guessing. And one of the things we have learned about technology is the use case that always develops new, interesting things is pornography. And the paperback book was made by Lady Chatterley's lover. It's all technologies, it's not just phones. So Apple's blocking adult content from the App Store means that all those opportunities don't exist. So Apple might argue that they're really good with innovation, but by acting as policemen, both on the kinds of apps and also on some of the things you can access on the phone. So you can't, one of my areas of work and stuff I've done lots on is phones for old people. And there's a possibility to do a phone where a customer holds the phone up against their ear, goes onto a website and plays different tones through their phone, and then the phone will modify the audio path for that person's hearing. Now, Apple doesn't give you access to the codec, so you couldn't do that on an iPhone. So some of the playing policeman really stifles innovation.
There's one over.
Yeah, thanks very much, Chris Hogg. Yeah, Simon, thank you very much for presentation. It's very interesting. I wonder, I mean, you mentioned, killing innovation, right? But isn't it the case that essentially what the iPhone did was to, give you a computer in your pocket and it was packaged in such a way that you had the apps, and then, of course, the first version not having an app store, but later versions did. And then the innovation is transferred to the applications. There was also innovation around business as well, because prior to 2007, it cost a lot of money to have data connection. I think it was £4 a megabyte, and even more when you were roaming. And all of that changed because of the deals that the Apple did as a new player in the market with each of the operators around the world that were the first preference customers. So I mean, I think my point is,
so
do you think that that's innovation as well?
The important game-changing thing that Apple did was change the balance of power. So before Apple, the operators held all the power and controlled what the handset manufacturers made. Nokia occasionally was big enough that they could do things that hadn't been asked for, like MMS and cameras. And sometimes it was collaborative. But no, it tended to be Nokia would come up with this way an operator could make money, like MMS, and then it would sell it into the operators. But generally, the operator would say, these are the features we want on a phone, this is what we're prepared to pay for it. I remember being in Motorola meetings where we said, have we ever made money out of a candy bar phone? We made all our money on flip phones. I'd be in Sony Ericsson meetings where we'd have a phone with a bill of materials of $70. We'd go and try and sell it to the operator for $80. And the operator would say, we'll give you 68. And we'd say, but you know it's costing us 70 and you're offering us $2 less. And they'd say, yes, but we'll take 3 million of them. So you'll lose $2 million, but that will get your economies of scale up. It'll get your cost of making the phone down to $65, and then you can sell them to everyone else at a $15 margin. And we would take deals like that. So the only time we, as either Motorola or Sony Ericsson, had an upper hand was when a new G came out, and we were the only game in town, particularly Motorola that was very good at the radio engineering. So we would do deals where if an operator wanted a 3G phone, we would make them take the 2G phones we wanted to sell them at the same time. And there'd be some quite angry branding arguments where an operator would want their logo on the phone, a Motorola would want their logo. And I remember talking to the CMO about a $3 billion Mexican standoff that we had with one of the operators over whose badge went on the back of a phone. And I remember talking to the CMO and said, we won't really walk away from this. He said, no, of course we won't walk away from it, but they don't know that. But what Apple's done is move all the power to Apple. So Apple gets revenue share on data, Apple gets to dictate marketing strategies for the operators. If you type in Samsung S25 into an operator's website, it will say, have you considered an iPhone? And that's Apple's doing, not the operators. The individuals within an operator sign a personal NDA with Apple. They can't talk to their colleagues about secret Apple stuff, or they could get sued by Apple. So it sets people within a big organization against each other. So yes, there's been innovation, but it's not good for the industry. Apple's sucking all the money out of the industry.
Thank you for an excellent talk. I was just wondering, you mentioned that some of the previous dominant companies had attempted to set up a sort of walled garden for their services. Apple has a reasonable penetration into other markets that the same consumers that are buying the mobile phones are now buying these other products, and I was wondering whether this is going to put up a larger barrier to them having the same fate as many of the other companies.
Yes, probably, but as I said, we're seeing Google's dominance being challenged by AI systems, and technology just tends to move on. So also the BlackBerry example where people thought that BlackBerry messaging was, well, RIM thought BlackBerry messaging was so dominant people wouldn't leave them. So yes, it makes it more laggy, but I still think there's an opportunity for that to fall in time.
There's one there, and then we have one down at the front.
Okay, thank you. Okay, yeah, me, thanks. Thank you for an excellent talk. Can I just raise a completely different subject, which is sustainability? And why has it taken, or why isn't it still here? Why can't you get a phone, an iPhone or any other make of phone, where you can change the battery yourself, or you can get the screen changed easily? what? I mean, I know that the companies want to sell you new phones, but surely in this day and age, you know, there should be something which is making people think about: do you really need a new phone, or do you just need a new battery?
It's not about taking the phone apart, it's about putting it together. In a factory, it's much easier to use glue than use screws. If you want rigidity in a phone, people want phones to be as thin as possible and as rigid as possible. And the more opportunity you have to unscrew things, the less rigid a phone is. But it was quite a lot thicker. HMD has done a deal with iFixit, where they now have a website of components, and you can buy stuff online, you can buy the tools online. There is an EU mandate for better repairability. So it's balancing the two things. How much do you want a phone to be green and repairable, and how much do you want it to be the newest, thinnest phone? And and they're quite thick, and they're quite thick, and they creak. Yes. No. Just.
Hi. First of all, thank you very much for a most interesting presentation. I have a son who spent some considerable time as a senior development manager in the games industry. And when he saw the title of your lecture, he sort of went incandescent. And he was longing to come and lock horns with you, but unfortunately he couldn't make it. So he asked me to, I'm sure that he will, he asked me to lob a point of view into the discussion. So this is just me putting his point of view forward. Apple successfully moved mobile phones from feature phones to app-driven phones. This surely paved the way for innovation in all aspects of phone hardware, software, and mechanical design. Feature phones were limited to fixed features, and with phones all being different. For example, as a former games developer, having to create literally dozens of versions of a game for various phones in no way enhanced innovation, and it limited what software could be developed to ensure all phones would work. So an element of that still exists.
I was watching a review of the S25, the Samsung, and the reviewer was saying the new processor, the Snapdragon 8 Elite for Galaxy, is a fantastic processor, but pointless, because anything you might want to do on it has been optimized for a cheap phone. Finding a game that actually takes advantage of all that extra power, you really have to go and look for it. There's virtually nothing that supports the extra power. So by making stuff homogeneous, you're actually holding back the development of more interesting and better games.
I think you're right.
Yes, it's you.
Thank you for the presentation. But one thing I was listening for, but never came up, was some reference to the Apple Watch, the smart watch, which didn't appear in your list so far, at least not so far. Sorry,
I'll repeat the question back.
The reason I raised the smart watch is that when they started to come in, must be quite a few years ago now, I thought, what can anyone do? What use would that be? And since I've become more interested in monitoring my own health condition and watching trainers at the gym, I realized that they're now doing all sorts of things. You find them. But surely that must count as an innovation and a breaking into a new area where health monitoring becomes important and becomes interesting to people.
And yes, I agree. So, and I think Apple's done a really nice job with the watches. What's the really expensive one called? But it's got lovely features, lovely bits of engineering. It's got the Breitling style emergency stuff. I'm torn on. So if you just want to watch that sells the time, something that you have to charge every 3 days is really annoying. A regular watch either winds itself or you put a new battery in every 10 years. But yes, for health monitoring, whether it's a watch or a ring, I see lots of interesting stuff, but it's not just Apple innovating there. There's lots of companies, whether it's Fitbit or Garmin, or lots of companies are doing interesting watch and general health stuff. And I think the ring market is starting to look really interesting.
I mean, the other one for health, and it's sort of personal interest here, the best place to monitor health is actually in an earbud or a hearing aid. I mean, the ear is designed to be stable. It's got the best access for measuring temperature, for blood pressure. Something that you put on the wrist you wave around is the worst possible place to put a health monitor. So I think we'll see that change over the next 5 years.
What about glasses? Are they?
The problem is you're not actually putting the glasses somewhere where you're picking up the physiological process. The ear canal's really good. Mm-hmm. But maybe that's another lecture. There's one up there.
Kevin?
Yeah, Kevin Holly from BT. Yeah, very quick question. So you haven't mentioned the foldable phones that are coming out now. There are many innovations that are coming along with foldable phones. Apple hasn't done it yet, but what do you think about that? Do they work? Do they last?
So actually, this screen, this is 3 years old, and this screen's just starting to go.
It's 3 years old.
The reason I like it is this is the only phone that doesn't look like all the others, but it's only one trick. So yes, Apple will do a foldable. Apple's got to do a foldable phone because there's so little differentiation between the products, and phones have been a fashion thing for 30 years. And if I put that on a table, and somebody walks into the room, they go, "Oh wow, have a look." No one does that. If it was an S25 or a Red Magic 10 or any interesting new phone, they wouldn't do it. So just as a point of differentiation, Apple needs to do it, and they'll sell millions and millions when they do a foldable phone. And everyone will think Apple invented the foldable phone, just like everyone thinks Apple invented the smartphone.
I mean, one of the interesting things that we've lost is it wasn't that long ago when you got a new phone, you were really proud of it, and if you were sort of down at the pub, people would just put it on the table to show you've got this great new phone. When you get a new phone now, you're basically pissed off at how difficult it is to transfer everything from the old one. I mean, when did anybody last enjoy getting a new phone?
When was there last a queue outside shops to buy the new phone? Yes.
I'm wondering, on this level, wondering a little bit if you have any thoughts on the definition of a phone. What is a phone now? I just got an upgrade for my car, so when I now drive, I can say, "Hey Siri," and it works. I don't have to touch my phone, which of course is illegal, and I shouldn't. I don't have to press a button on my steering column. It's there. So now, and also my son, who's 7, he doesn't know any of this, but he uses "Hey Siri." You know, that is, whether it's a phone or whatever it is, it's "Hey Siri," that's the thing. So do you still consider this to be the phone, or is there a bigger ecosystem like the watch? I use the Apple Watch for phone calls, notifications, pretty much the same except watching videos. So definition and diffusion, I would love to hear some perspectives on.
So there was a genius at Motorola called Jeff, and it's gone because it would go, but it'll come back to me. Jeffrey Frost. Actually, he was responsible for this T-shirt because he was complaining about how slow we were at producing products. So stop the madness, Moto. Stop sitting in meetings and go and make some phones. And he used to refer to it as the device formerly known as the cell phone. And yes, the people don't use phones for phoning anymore. We've moved beyond that. I remember early days of Watt Mobile when we saw lots of smartphones around, from Alcatel and Nortel. There were lots of companies making smartphones. My point that Apple didn't invent them. And I was talking to the editor of What Mobile and trying to define what made a smartphone. And this speaks to social norms of the time, which would have been late 90s. And smartphones were big, ugly things, and feature phones, which were the normal phones, were little flip phones, and they looked elegant and they looked nice. And we said, well, we could do it as if you're going to add programs to them, if you could add Java stuff. So, well, no, we can think of phones that are very clearly not smartphones, but you can do that on. And we can think of things that are smartphones that you can't do that on because that you just run the software that comes with it. And we went through all the different permutations. And she came up with a definition that worked perfectly, that when you tested it by going, yes for that phone, and we know it's a smartphone, no for that phone, and we know it isn't a smartphone. And her definition was, if you're walking down the street and you've got it next to your ear, if you look like a dick, it's a smartphone.
Is it some? Yes.
Hi, sorry.
I'm trying to find the microphone.
Sorry, I know somebody asked a question about Apple's walled garden, but just building on that one, I'd argue that if you were to contrast the state of the market when Nokia and others were dominant versus when Apple is dominant today, I'd say outside of core technology and innovation itself, I think there are a few factors which make them so dominant, right? Which is the availability of capital, the consumer moat and loyalty that they've built, and the data that they have. So for any competitor or startup to compete against that, isn't the gestation period going to be that much longer and that much tougher versus what it took to overthrow a Nokia or a...
What we've learnt is the surprise comes from an unexpected direction. Rich Miner, who was one of the founders of Android, so Rich Miner and Andy Rubin founded Android, and then they sold it to Google, said he was minded to do that because he was scared of Microsoft's dominance of the OS market. And he thought there needed to be a rival in the form of Android. And of course, it's turned out that Microsoft isn't dominant and Apple is. So we don't know where the rival will come from. There's all sorts of interesting things happening with satellite, and that could well undermine what we know as the mobile operator market. And that could turn the whole world market upside down, with the one proviso that satellites give really good coverage everywhere except inside buildings. And people forget that. People think, I can use Starlink anywhere. But okay, this is the Faraday Centre and really no phone should work. But you wouldn't be able to use a Starlink phone in this building.
The other thing on that is it can change quickly. I was doing some development work for Samsung in '97 when they decided they wanted to do phones. I mean, Samsung was big. They did lots of stuff, but they didn't do phones. And I remember the work was being done down in Staines. They've got a development centre here, and we had some big come over to talk to us about it, who said, our vision is in 3 years we'll be number one in phones. And you could see every engineer in the room thinking, I mustn't laugh, I'll get sacked if I laugh. They weren't far out. Somebody with the power and the determination, and there are lots of companies around the world that have that, can actually get in very quickly if they do the right things. I mean, in their case, they copied Ericsson and then went beyond it. But it can happen quickly. I mean, the rise of Samsung, the fall of Nokia, happened remarkably fast.
Also, back at the surprises happened, Razor wasn't supposed to be a volume phone. Razor was I'm very keen to write a book on the history of Razor. The CTO issued a challenge to the engineers, can you build a phone this thin? I think it was 2 mil or something, which was outrageous. And the engineers took us as an internal challenge and they built a phone. I think it could only make calls, not receive calls, but they demonstrated innovative ways of doing it. And that turned into a skunkworks, out of hours, unfunded project to do Razor. And Motorola had this deep system called M-gates of planning and products, and you had to get through all the gates, and you had to have operator support, and you had to show it was easily manufacturable, and you had to highlight all the risks. And Razor failed on all of them. There was no interest from the operators. The keyboard only came from one manufacturer that had limited production volume. The antenna had to be inserted by hand. It was a complete mess for M-gates. But Geoffrey Frost wanted it. He wanted 800 phones to go into Oscar bags for award winners as a Halo product. So when it was presented to the product planning committee, and I wasn't on the board, but Geoffrey took me along as his pet phone geek, and the Razor team had got to the stage where they needed it on the roadmap, and they told us it would sell 800,000 units. 800,000 was a magic number because then it washed its face, and it was what the V70 phone, the rotator phone, had done. So Geoffrey, larger-than-life person, super smart, got an agreement that he could have this low-volume phone because it was a marketing cost and it was never going to make us any money. I later found out that the development team were lying and that 800,000 was a made-up number and they actually thought it was 300,000. But that phone went on to save Motorola. So trying to work out where the future is coming from, no, you can't do that. Excellent.
How are we doing on time? Sorry.
We're a little over.
We are sort of getting rid of our phones 2 to 4 years. A lot of people, probably like myself, they're sitting in a drawer. The recycling issues, is the industry really doing something about recycling? I had an event that got cancelled at short notice, which was recycling of solar panels, only technology in the country, and they were setting up a plant at Deptford, and the MD decided he wasn't coming. But mobile phones are a lot smaller, there's probably a lot of valuable materials in there. Getting the phones out of drawers, getting them into a recycle mechanism where certain stuff can be reclaimed. What's happening?
I actually think the industry is quite good about that. Lots of phone shops have dump bins. You can take your old phone and put them in dump bins. There are companies like Shields Environmental and DTC that are really good at taking the phones through the process of can I repair and refurbish this and sell it on? Can I repair and refurbish it and sell it to the third world? Can I strip it for components? There's actually quite a lot of good stuff that actually happens with recycling. So the onus is on you to take it to one of the dump bins in a phone shop rather than the industry.
Yeah, in the middle, and then we'll move to.
I focus on the smart wearable devices, and such as wearable earbuds, wearable watch, smart watch, and smart glasses. I think a lot of the wearable devices, future wearable devices, I think maybe the AI, small AI model can help us very much in future. But now the AI model is very large. You should connect to the internet, and your secret is not protected very well. And I think in the future, when the AI model becomes smaller, and you can store in your mobile phone, and it can help us. It's just like just clone yourself. That means when you listen, the AI model is also listening. When you see something, the AI model is also seeing. So it can help you thinking out many solutions better than yourself. So I think what is the future smarter wearable devices? What's your opinion? Yeah.
So, two answers to that. One is I don't really understand why it needs to be local. It's a connected device. You can be quite happy with it being, with the processing being off-board. Now, it could be off-board at the local cell. It could be an edge computing. It doesn't have to be at some supercomputer miles away. And the other is, well, with DeepSeek, we've already seen AI models get dramatically smaller. So there is scope for them to get smaller. But I don't think they need to get so small that you do all your AI processing locally.
Hello there.
Yes.
Hi. One thing that you touched on, or was touched on, for my sins, I worked at Scion back in the 90s, and I know a few friends that had some hand in that iPhone thing that you mentioned. Battery life. We were paranoid, the Royal we, paranoid about computers, handheld computers, for those that don't know, running for months on small batteries. We've become complacent. And if a phone lasts a day, we think that's amazing. So one area of innovation that wouldn't necessarily change the form factor, but could allow us to accept or wish to have phones that last for weeks without recharging, that would be innovation. Wouldn't change the whole device. So I don't see any evidence that anybody cares anymore about how long things last. That's the essence of the question. We all need to say we want it to run for weeks before we...
And it's something everyone worries about. It's the two fundamental things you want a phone to do are not run out of power and have a decent radio signal. And they just don't seem to be that important. I phoned EE a few days ago. I said, I need to get my mother a new phone. Your coverage isn't great at the back of her flat. It's really good at the front of her flat. Which of your phones should she have that gives the best radio signal? And the guy on the sales desk, no idea, we don't have that in our database. So being me, I then WhatsApped. One of my other hobby horses, when somebody said you're giving a talk today, and I said no, it's a polemic, is coders being lazy. In the days of Epoch and Symbian, coders wrote for the hardware and they wrote efficient code. Now everyone uses big lazy frameworks that are so fat that Hello World is a gigabyte. It's and that has a massive impact on. Yeah.
I think there's also one other thing which some in the industry are becoming aware of, which is Apple and others have trained us to charge devices every day. But a lot of people are saying there's a limit to the number of devices I'm prepared to charge each day. And although, wireless charging came in to try and say, just chuck it all in a bowl and it'll work in the morning, it's not really taken off. And most people are happy to charge 3 personal devices, but it's stopping them buying the 4th. And that, as we get more interesting things in other devices, whether they're rings, earbuds, whatever, may be one of the things that start people to think maybe battery life is becoming important again.
One thing I would credit Apple with doing a really good job on is MagSafe. And when we get Qi 2 and every device has magnetic charging, that'll be really nice and really good. And each manufacturer will pretend they invented it, but it's just the evolution of standards.
Thank you.
Yeah, thank you very much for the talk. So my question was really again about the use case and building devices for specific user segments. Now, as we see the device and how the definition of a phone changes, as we see the devices move from phones to now wearable, but not just wearable, but wearable in combination with AI models. So for example, the Meta reality glasses that are multimodal, so they can take input that is text, that is voice, that is videos, and you can interact with it. How do you see the definition of a phone and the primary use case of a phone change?
I need to think about that too long to give you a knee-jerk response. But I do think it's about understanding people being different and different things for different people.
And the smart glasses, I think, is an interesting one. There's a couple of friends who have got some physical disabilities. Someone who's almost blind. And they were amazed that with the Meta smart glasses, they could tell them there's a taxi there that you could use. That they're beginning to augment what you can do, and in this case, in a good way. But there's quite a lot of interesting work that's happening in terms of hearing loss, of sight loss, other disabilities, where people are beginning to say you can put useful things into these devices rather than just you can put gimmicks into them. And quite a lot of that is coming from those communities themselves as people, I mean, older people, I look around the audience, there's a fair number of us there. Those of us are now at a point that we can think it would be nice if we could do this as well, it would be helpful. Whereas in the past it's tended to be designed by other people who were saying, well, maybe this would be helpful to you, but they don't actually know what it is they're trying to solve. And I think there's opportunity. I mean, and sorry, I'm probably talking here of something you should be talking about. This is what you've been doing for so long. Of how do we make devices that are applicable to what people need rather than what the industry needs?
So by understanding people.
Yeah.
But I can think of things I'd like smart glasses to do. I'd like to go into a shop overseas and look at prices on a supermarket shelf and my glasses to tell me what that meant in pounds.
It's already doing that with the latest Google model that came out in November, where now the use case is moving from just talking, but now it's kind of like a co-pilot, like an assistant. So you can even translate languages in real time. So it's like Google Translate on steroids.
And is that glasses or is it an earbud? Is it an earbud? Do you want an electronic babel fish? Yeah.
Well, you're getting pretty close to real-time translation in some earbuds now. Sorry.
Thank
we'll chat amongst ourselves and ignore the audience.
Yeah. Thank you again. You mentioned the coverage problem, the sensitivity of the devices, and nobody's got an idea as to whether or not whether one device is better than another. But I think that might also be the case because most of the manufacturers they have to go through operator acceptance tests as well for these things before the operator would include them in their stores. So almost all the major brands do this. And there's also an industry certification scheme for mobile devices, and this sort of thing is covered in that. So I think it's not. I'm not really sure it's an issue to say, oh, which one is more sensitive than the other, because they're all basically trying to meet a sort of playing field that's been created by the industry, operators and manufacturers working together to agree it.
So this is another huge part of my life. So mobile coverage is stuff I worry about a lot. And I've put a plan together for Ofcom to actually find where all the not spots are in the country. But some devices are better. And actually, you tend to find the cheaper devices have better radios than the more expensive devices, because the thicker you make a phone, the more space you have for an antenna. Also, the more space you have for a speaker, you can do better audio. So it does vary from device to device. But my big problem is Apple has a long history of very poor radio and getting away with it because the operators can't say no to Apple. It was so bad with the original iPhone, there were crisis meetings between the operators, Ericsson and Nokia, on how to re-engineer their networks to cope with the iPhone.
Yeah. I completely agree with you on that point, because I remember the sort of bump device that people were given, when one of the original iPhones first came out, and people were told they weren't holding it properly and so on. And, right, but I think that the general point, or my general point, is that there is a kind of level of where there's a kind of minimum level that the industry has agreed. And yes, some phones might be above or below that, but of course the average customer doesn't really know or care about that. They just want to have a phone that works. And so, I mean, I don't know how you would solve that issue other than if the operators were to do some sort of mass education of people saying, oh, this phone's better than this in terms of its sensitivity and so on.
Well, you can't even do it that broadly because it's infrastructure dependent. I did a project at Watt Mobile where we, in conjunction with Carphone Warehouse, where we lab tested 60 phones, a TUV approved lab, and I worked really hard on how did we take decibels and gain and signal to noise ratios and turn it into blobs that an ordinary magazine can read. The more blobs, the better. And Carphone looked at it and said, but this doesn't match our return rates. We look at our return rates and we look at what phones you say are good. There was a particular Ericsson phone that we said was good and they thought had problems. And that led to lots of meetings with the handset manufacturers and the operators. And it was actually, I learned lots. And it was really good for the magazine because it got us in to meet important people in all the places. But what I learned was different handsets perform differently on different networks. So when I phoned the operator from the salesperson at EE and said, I want a phone for my mother because the signal's bad in her flat, the question he needed to ask me was, what's her postcode? So he could look up to see whose infrastructure they've got in that part of North London. So only the operators really know how well a handset performs on their network.
And that's one as well that, I mean, it maybe today it works well, and then they rip out a Huawei base station, which could be better than the ones they're putting in to replace it, and suddenly your coverage goes down.
Yeah, they've all got their upgrade programs.
And of course 3G is being sunset, so we're seeing bigger holes.
Yeah, thanks for a very interesting talk. As an old radio engineer, I totally agree with your statement about Motorola and how very good they used to be in that area. Maybe still are somewhere. My question is, what of the devices that are on the market today, which ones have the best radios?
Well, so when I couldn't get an answer from customer service at EE, I phoned Matt Chatterley, who's head of buying devices for EE. And said, I asked him the same question, and he said, well, actually, when you do pay more, you get better. And he, as I mentioned earlier, he is a massive iPhone fan. But he knew I didn't want an iPhone. And he said, actually, go for either an S25 or a Google Pixel 9. But that is for use on EE. It would be different on a different network. With my phone, I get a really bad echo. I don't hear the echo, but the other person hears a really bad echo on that. But I think that's a problem with my Samsung phone.
If we get a microphone up the far...
Yeah, we are 20 minutes over. It is 20 past.
Well, it's half past.
Sorry?
Half past.
Okay.
How much, in terms of going back to innovation, what role do you think the regulatory authorities have got to play? And I'm thinking about Apple is essentially the American anti-competitive model. You know, it doesn't want FaceTime to work with any other phone. It's a bit like saying, well, if you have an Apple phone, you can only call someone an Apple. It sells more phones. We've seen the EU force them to USB-C charging. Do you think the regulators have a role in forcing standards through to encourage more innovation?
I'd keep it closer to home. I don't think. So I'm on the Terminals Working Group of the GSMA, and we did a response to the EU that led to that the USB-C thing was also tied in with repairability. I don't think that's the right mechanism. I think the right mechanism is organisations like ETSI, the GSMA, and the operators. I think governmental type institutions don't understand technology well enough.
One question, I think this probably needs to be the last one. We'll be around for a moment afterwards, so there's one at the back. John? Actually, if you could bring the microphone down while John's going up, and then we'll do one other quick one at the front, the lady in the middle. So, yes, that one first. Sit.
Yes, good afternoon. You haven't mentioned anything about security, so I'm very, very curious, is there anything game-changing coming along to assist people in securing transactions online? You know, the current situation is quite dire in terms of scamming, etc. So is there something around the horizon?
Different level. Security at a level of intercepting phone calls is now very good. If you want to intercept a phone call, you put in a fake base station and tell the phone to drop down to 2G so that you can listen to it. But 4G, 5G, you're probably safe from anyone except a government. The phone scammers phoning up and using a phone as a tool to tell you lies, I think that's a civil legal problem and not a technology problem.
But you've got two-factor authentication via SMS at the moment, which is, at least in the past, wasn't considered completely secure. So
it isn't secure at all.
No, yeah.
But, and actually, the one thing I would want would be better policing of caller ID. So when you see the caller ID, that's what the person sending wants to present, and I think it should be what the network's actually seeing from the device.
If you have a quick question, and then we'll come to you to finish off.
As follows on the previous question about security, there's a lot of people in the world who are in jail who have been killed because of Pegasus and vulnerabilities in both Samsung and Apple. Would the governments permit a phone to be sold that cannot be subverted?
I don't know what Pegasus is.
It's one of the Israeli ones that they've been flogging off to track journalists. Route 1 on phones.
Sorry?
It's one of the...
oh, yes, it was a secure phone that... yes. So it's saying, should there be legal intercept on WhatsApp? Should there be? And I think we just have to live with the world the way it is. I need to have a bit of a moral think about that.
And one quick...
Okay, hello Simon, thank you for your interesting presentation. We want to, I'm from China, we want to do some connection business between UK and China about the telecommunication, wireless telecommunication, because our team have more than 20 years about telecommunication engineering. So what can do, based on your experience, many years experience, so you think what should we do about this connection?
I will introduce you to somebody who's expert in exactly this.
Okay, thank you so much, yeah.
So come and talk to Simon afterwards. Thank you all. I'm afraid we're running out of time. I'd like to say a really big thank you on behalf of myself and I'm sure all of you to Simon for talking to us.